Welcome back, casual gardeners. After a couple of weeks of threatening, we're finally, for sure, getting our first freeze, probably Wednesday or Thursday night. I'm filming this on a Tuesday. What this video is I'm going to go through 7 alternatives to peat moss. While I'm doing that, I'm going to just kind of get my irrigation system ready for the freeze. So it's a kind of a twofer. I just want to say there is no true alternative to peat moss. I know there's a lot of pressure to move away from peat moss. There is nothing in the world quite like it, though. It's kind of amazing. So these alternatives aren't going to tick all the boxes. In fact, if you're growing carnivorous plants, and I know some of my subscribers do, because so do I, you're still stuck with peat moss. No matter how you feel about the environmental damage from harvesting it, it's all we got for now. So I'd like to start by talking about coconut coir. So number 1 is coconut coir. And that is probably the closest analog in terms of all of the many uses that we have for it to peat moss. I'd recommend getting it in brick form because it's way cheaper that way in terms of the hydrated volume. You can use coconut coir in potting soil exactly how you would use peat moss. You can also use coconut coir as a soil amendment to work in some organic matter and break things up a bit, like if you've got clay soil like me. You can also use coconut coir as a mulch. So coconut coir does all of those things. Unfortunately, if you have carnivorous plants, coconut coir is not for you because it's saltier than my language in rush hour traffic. So unless you have the patience and the distilled water or reverse osmosis water handy to just rinse it and rinse it and rinse it again, coconut coir is not for carnivorous plants. The first step in preparing my garden for the frost is I'm going to, well, I think I'll leave this valve open, and I'm just going to pull off my manifold. Oh, yeah, let's release a little pressure real quick. So I'm just going to remove this manifold entirely from my system so that this is open to relieve any pressure as things freeze. And then also I want to take off my hose timer. If this looks like a cool hose timer and you'd like to learn more about it, I did a video about it. So I'm going to link to it right somewhere around here probably. Any hose timers you have, you're going to want to take them inside and take out the batteries. Number 2 on my list is wood-based stuff. Theoretically, you can use wood-based products actually as a mixture in a potting soil. In fact, there is a company called Peat Moss that's offering peat-free alternative potting soil that's basically made from recycled shredded paper. So you can use shredded paper, you can use chipped bark, you can use rough sawdust if you work with wood. Some of you are probably bursting a blood vessel. No, don't mix wood in with your soil. It will suck up all the nitrogen. Add more nitrogen. You'll be okay. And it will slowly release the nitrogen as the wood decomposes. So it's going to be fine. It's not going to be the same as peat moss or coconut coir, though. It's just not as good. But you can mulch with it just fine. We're all comfortable mulching with shredded bark, right? All right, so the next thing I'm going to do as I prepare for my freeze is I'm going to get in here. This leads to the low point in the line leading down to my drip system. And ooh, spiders. Okay, I'm just going to open that valve. There we go. So now that length of pipe underneath the lawn is less likely to need future care. As I laid out my irrigation system, I identified low points and I put little valves in the low points so I can just go boop. Because it gets cold here. It gets cold and I don't want to do any plumbing. Plumbing sucks. Number 4 is pine needles. You can use pine needles as a mulch. You can use pine needles actually mixed in with your soil mix if you want to. They'll improve drainage and keep things light and fluffy. Contrary to popular belief, pine needles will not change your pH. That is an urban myth or a rural myth depending on where you live. I get a lot of pine needles from that pine tree you can see in the background. Makes me really happy. Next thing I've got to do for winterizing my garden is I've got to deal with this hose link thing. It's actually pretty easy to do. So I'm going to just disconnect the ends here. And then I'm going to pull this all the way out. And as I bring it back in, that quick out and in is just going to push out all the water. Ah, it's empty. Oh man, makes me so happy. These guys are not a sponsor, but if they were, I'd be really proud. Now that I've done that, I'm just gonna lift it off its little spiky thing. There we go. And this is going in my garage. That way I don't have to worry about it getting ruined by exposure to the elements. Well, I've pretty much winterized my garden now. I opened up all my low valves and drained all my things, and all my electronics are inside. So I'm just going to sit here and talk to you about number 5, rice holes. Rice holes? Yeah, okay. So it's basically, if rice were wheat, this would be the chaff. You can use it as a soil additive to keep things light and fluffy and add organic matter. It doesn't decay readily, so it does fill that role for peat moss in a soil mix, kind of. Doesn't do as good a job retaining moisture. You can also mulch with rice holes if you want to. I just got some in the mail, and I'm gonna play with them a little bit and see what I can do with them, because I'm curious. I'm a curious boy. Number 6 is leaf mold. Leaf mold is kind of amazing. You can use it in soil mix, just like peat moss. You can use it as an amazing mulch. I think I'd kind of like to see if I can use leaf mold in carnivorous plants. That would be kind of cool. We're going to check that out later. It's going to take me a few months to make my leaf mold. Instructions on how to make leaf mold are going to begin right now. Leaf mold is easier to make than it is to buy, at least in my part of the world. I'll just show you all of the steps. Step 1 is, of course, to gather up your leaves. I'm going to use my leaf sucker. Probably most of you have leaf blowers. I believe that the question of whether you wish to suck or to blow is entirely up to personal choice. This does shred the leaves as it gathers them and drops them directly into a little bag, which I find convenient. If you are leaf blowing instead of leaf sucking, you'll probably want to make a pile and then drive your lawnmower over it. Aside from that difference, it's about the same. Now, once you've collected your big bag of shredded leaves, by whichever method is most comfortable for you, we're going to want to give them a good soaking. So it's probably best to do this step before you have your hose water turned off, or else you'll have to explain to your significant other why you're hauling a big bag of shredded leaves into your bath or tub, and it could get awkward. And I'm going to give it just a really good soaking. Need a lot of water in here, at least to start. And don't worry, there's a trick to make it not get swampy. Okay, now that they are nice and drenched, I'm just going to go ahead and tie off my bag. Now, let's roll it over. And with some sort of pointy object, I choose this stick, I'm going to poke some drainage holes. Just a few. So that as it sits, the water can drain out. Kind of like that. Now I'm going to take this bag and put it up against a south-facing wall where there's not lawn that I care about, and just let it sit there through the winter. And by the spring, theoretically, this should be leaf mold. And the 7th thing, just real quick, this one's kind of iffy for me, is composted manure. It is different from garden compost. It's not going to be as fibrous And honestly, if I were going to use composted manure, I would just use it as a mulch. I wouldn't necessarily use it in place of peat moss in my DIY soil mix, but I might consider using it instead of fertilizer in my DIY soil mix because it's fertile stuff. So anyway, 7 alternatives to peat moss. You'll note that very few of them replace everything about peat moss. As ecologically harmful as peat moss harvesting is, oh my gosh, that stuff is useful. Do you have any ideas for substitutes for peat moss that I might have missed? Or any thoughts on the ideas that I shared? Put that in the comments. Let's all learn together and grow together. Thank you for joining me in my garden today. I hope you have a wonderful time in your own.